Thank you, and thank you for coming in such overwhelming numbers to this session, which is on SLAPP. Around the world today, the threats to press freedom and democracy, as we heard this morning as well, does not just come from tyrants anymore or totalitarian states. They come from elected demagogues. They have shown that they can use populism, ultranationalism, or bigotry, and weaponize the social web to get themselves elected. And once in power, they then proceed to dismantle the very institutions of democracy that got them there. Nowhere is safe anymore, and they do not necessarily have to kill or drive journalists into exile. They just have to file lawsuits and pursue journalists and publishers. My name is Kunda Dixit. I'm a publisher based in Kathmandu in Nepal. We have 2 publications, and it's an honor to be moderating this session on what's called the strategic, legal, what is it called? Suits Against Public Participation, which is SLAPP. And we'll hear more about what that actually means a little later. But governments use legal tools to hound journalists and silence them. If they cannot do it in the country where the publication is from, then they go and use libel tourism to sue them in some other jurisdiction, of which I myself and our publication was a victim, or was going to be a victim of. And I'm really thankful to Media Defense, who we represented here. This was way back in 2008, where we were threatened with a huge lawsuit by a British celebrity actress for a story we did in Nepal, but in the UK courts. Luckily, Media Defense came to our defense, and we managed to wriggle out of that. But a lot of others have not been so lucky, precisely because they don't have that backup to help them. So I'm really proud to present today's panel that includes Bea Bodrodin, who is a human rights lawyer and researcher and trainer based in Hungary, Alexander Papachristos, who's the executive director of the Cyrus Vance Center for International Justice, and Carlos Gallo from the Media Defense, which used to be called the Media Defense. Yeah, that's how I used to know it, MDIF, yeah, IL, yeah. Bea, would you like to go first?
Yeah, can you,
Okay.
Sounds good. This is the first time I use that type of microphone, so I hope it would work. So nice to meet you all. Thank you for the invitation. I'm a lawyer from Hungary, and I work with 3 independent media outlets, meaning I work with more than 100 journalists on a daily basis. It doesn't mean that they keep contacting me every day, but it means that I'm available for them on a daily basis. And I'm a member of the expert group on SLAPP, which was set up by the European Commission. Later I'm going to talk about the European initiatives on SLAPP, and I was one of the members of the expert group. So I'm going to talk about, I give you a short introduction to the definition. I will share some stories and data about the SLAPP situation in Europe. I will talk about the EU SLAPP initiatives, and I also need to talk about special cases, what happens, how legal threats, legal procedures are threatening journalists in authoritarian regimes, such as Hungary or Poland, if we are talking about the European Union. But this is a global issue. I don't want to talk about EU, but obviously one of the focuses will be the new EU initiative. So starting with the definition, it's an easy sentence. What SLAPP is an abusive lawsuit filed by a private party with the purpose of silencing critical speech. To help to identify what SLAPP is, I listed three questions, and if your answer is yes to all of them, it's very likely that you are dealing with a SLAPP. So is the legal action brought by a private party? It's important to note that even government officials, politicians, can act in their private capacities, so it's very often. Does the legal action target acts of public participation? We know that public participation is a broad term. It covers journalism, activism, advocacy, whistleblowing, lots of activities that covers public participation. Has the lawsuit been brought with the purpose of silencing, shutting down, or discouraging the acts of public participation? This is the hardest bit to answer. It's complicated. There are books to explain what this means, but I just give you a few aspects to take into account when you define or when we identify a SLAPP case. Because it's very typical that plaintiffs, slappers, so-called slappers, target individuals rather than just the organization they represent. There is a strong power and financial imbalance between the parties. The arguments that the plaintiffs is taking generally baseless, legally or factually. The lawsuit is many times part of a wider campaign to bully, harass, or intimidate the defendant. The main aim of slappers is not to win the case, just to cause pain, financial pain, just to make the journalist, the activist's life harder. And I took an example from my practice, which is a recent case. A female journalist working for a community radio in Hungary criticized a major hotel construction project run by an energy drink company. And she said a very critical comment on the company. She said that the drink is poisoning. I'm not going to analyze this legally, is it a legal issue or not, but I would like to show you what happened when she said this sentence alive in a radio program. So this company initiated a press correction procedure, which was actually given. They apologized. The female journalist apologized to say this word. But after this, there was a civil law procedure, a defamation procedure against her. And that time, I wasn't involved in the case. She paid what they requested. It was a small amount of money, but she paid. She thought she really thought that was a mistake. And then there was a criminal defamation case against her. So only for one comment, there were 3 parallel procedures going on. So this is a clear case, an example of a SLAPP. SLAPP exists in Europe for several years, but it got real attention when the Maltese journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia was murdered in 2017. I'm sure most of you know her story. She was a journalist, an activist, reported on Panama Papers, on corruption cases, revealed lots of corruption stories in Malta. And that time when she was killed, she faced 48 libel cases, roughly 48, that's what I could collect. and her family inherited all these cases. Of course, the criminal cases or procedures cannot be inherited, but 48 libels were taken against her at that time. That was the year when public discussion started in Europe about SLAPP, a coalition. Lots of NGOs gathered and formed a coalition. It's called Case Coalition. You can find their website, their link on the website. I show you a few data, some data about SLAPP situation in Europe. These data were gathered by the coalition with the snowballing sample method, which is not a reliable method, but NGOs gathered lots of cases from their country, and this shows a clear trend of increase of SLAPP cases. And if we look at who is initiating, who are the SLAPPers, you can see that mainly business persons, private entities, politicians acting in their private capacity, as I mentioned. And it is also listed the state-owned entity. I would define them as gongos. Even in my practice, I took quite a lot of cases when gongos were initiated, SLAPP type of cases. And who are the victims? It's obvious that individuals who are critical, who are writing in public, journalists are the majority of the SLAPP victims. Journalists. As a response of this phenomenon and this problem, the EU issued or started or addressed this issue with an anti-SLAPP initiative, started a few years ago. It's still, there will be a law in EU which will be a directive. This is a special law according to the European laws. It obliges all member states to enact, to create either a SLAPP law or to adapt legal safeguards in their procedural rules to stop SLAPP cases. And these safeguards are the early dismissal. The judges could or can dismiss the case in the very early stage when they found that it's obviously unfounded. There are, the procedural costs will be paid by the plaintiff. Damages can be also issued, and fines can also be issued by the court. It also has to be mentioned that this directive covers only civil cases, in cross-border civil cases. This is one of the main critics of this directive. I'm not going to talk about the critics, it's another presentation. But it's worth mentioning that at least they cover the civil proceedings. And what is also worth mentioning, the holistic approach of this whole initiative, because the law doesn't solve everything. It needs a shift of mindsets and to talk about this issue in a broader way. So the EU also enacted, or this involves a set of recommendations: awareness raising, legal training, data collection, reporting, and this is already in force. So the states already started doing this activity, and I highlighted the free legal aid because the states are strongly recommended to provide free legal aid to the victims of SLAPPs. And I also need to touch those countries which are tending to be authoritarian or authoritarian countries. The country where I come from, Hungary, I would definitely name my country as going towards that way. because the government controlled the media, the majority of the media try to influence the court with more or less success. And there is a very strong smear campaign against journalists, human rights activists, or anyone who is critical of the abusive power. I was also part of a smear campaign several years ago, before the elections. That's when they start, or when they doing smear campaigns more and more. And what is relevant to mention that new ways are or new tools are used. Slappers are creative. They use data protection law, which is GDPR. I'm sure most of you know what GDPR is. It's a European data protection regulation, and slappers use it very often with quite a lot of success, unfortunately. To conclude, I would repeat just my main points, that the main category of SLAPP defendants is journalists. Journalists are targeted personally rather than by the organizations they work for or represent. The phenomenon and the problem is an increasing threat to press freedom and democracy in Europe. And at the very end, I would highlight the importance of awareness-raising reporting and to providing free legal aid, which is obligatory for the states, which will be obligatory for the states. And my co-panelists, I'm sure, will talk about legal help they provide to journalists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bea, for that introduction to SLAPP. I think we can go straight on to Alexander.
How do we advance the PowerPoint? Thank you. I'm pleased to see so few friends here today, not because I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my friends. I'm always embarrassed in front of my friends, but because you are here out of interest. That's a great thing. Maybe we'll become friends, or maybe you'll become clients. That's more likely. At the Vance Center, we represent journalism organizations, human rights organizations around the world facing problems like SLAPPs. We work regularly with ICIJ and its members, OCCRP and its members, and publishers in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and now the United States. So please be our clients. SLAPP is one of those terms that is better as an acronym than a thing. Nobody can remember what it stands for, but it is an accurate description of the experience that journalists has when being sued. It's a shock. I did everything right. I reported well. I edited, fact-checked, legal review, and still I'm getting threatened or sued. And it's a shock, especially if you know what's coming with it. If you happen to be slapped in London or Miami or Sydney, then you really are looking at an existential threat, because the costs of defense can put you out of business, even though you did a good story and you win your case several years later. And during that time, you're not only paying a lawyer, or if you have the Vance Center or media defense, you're not paying a lawyer, but you're spending a great deal of your time defending the case. You're turning over your devices to some third-party company to analyze them for production of documents in the litigation. You're having to testify, something that no one likes to do, but particularly not journalists, asked about your sources and told that if you don't reveal the sources, then you can't make the defense that you have. So being slapped is no fun. Now, in the classic in the stereotype, there's the lone journalist who's writing about some massive government conspiracy all by herself. Now, of course, It's not that way anymore, if it ever was. Increasingly, journalists are collaborating. And one publishes a story in Nepal, and that story is also published in London and in Buenos Aires, the same story. And that's a source of new strength for journalists, not only to reach larger audiences, but to counteract this phenomenon of SLAPP. Who's going to get sued when 7 publications publish the same story? Well, usually it's the weakest one, of course. But the others presumably rise to the defense. Maybe not the money, but at least the solidarity. And so that's I should be advancing these slides. So that's the genesis of Reporters' Shield. Reporters' Shield is an actual thing. It is a program for publishers, broadcasters, to protect you from being slapped. And if you're slapped, to defend you. It is a membership program, as it says there, a standalone US-based nonprofit organization that publishers and broadcasters can join, can become members. Okay, we did that one already. So you go online and you apply to be a member of Reporters' Shield. You have to go through a process of disclosure, which is sometimes unpleasant for everyone, and I think journalists in particular don't like to talk about themselves too much. But you have to disclose your organization, if you have owners, if you have board members. It's a program for established, responsible publishers. That doesn't mean you have to be big or rich, but you have to be real. And you have to be independent, nonpartisan, apolitical, and ideally either doing investigative journalism or interested in doing it and just too scared of the consequences. And Reporters' Shield is meant to embolden you, to give you the courage to do investigative work, because Reporters' Shield will protect you. If you are accepted as a member, I think I just went through this too, didn't I? If you're accepted as a member, you have to pay an annual fee. Ha! There's the catch, right? But you might pay $1,000, $2,000, depending on where you are, how big you are, how many stories you do. Maybe it's $5,000. If you're really big, $10,000 a year. Now, if you have a lawsuit, depending on where you have it, that much money can go away very quickly in one lawsuit. And this program will defend you against as many lawsuits as you have during that year, up to a certain maximum amount. So the program will pay for $500,000 of legal fees to defend you over a year. That's a lot of lawsuits. Or in London, it's one lawsuit. But we're working on that. But if you're in Mexico, but you get sued in New York, or if you're in Harare and you get sued in London, or for that matter, in Harare, you get a lawyer to defend you. And we have built out a network of lawyers, not all over the world yet, we're working on it, but initially, it should say somewhere here, that's the membership costs. So initially, you see, we're in North America, not the Caribbean, Latin America, Central America, Europe, which includes Central Asia, and the Caucasus. And next we're going to Sub-Saharan Africa, and then Asia and Australia and New Zealand. So we're rolling this out over the course of a year. Anybody based in those green regions can join now. Later the yellow region, and then the dark green region. However, you might be in Mexico, as I say, but sued in New York. And again, this will cover you. I think that's the end. Anyway, so you apply, you're accepted, you're a member. You get a threatening letter from a lawyer in London. That's how often this starts. You contact Reporters Shield. A lawyer in London responds and advises you about that letter, whether you should do anything or not, and if so, what you should do. That's all free. Then, unfortunately, you get sued after all. You contact Reporters Shield, and again, you get a lawyer paid to defend you in that case. What Reporters Shield doesn't do is pay if you lose. So if the court rules against you, fairly or unfairly, the cost is on you. But the expense of defending you is covered. So this is an effort to try to systematize, to make systematic a defense against these SLAPP cases for publishers and broadcasters around the world. Money for this program is substantial. The US government, through USAID, gave $9 million. Another donor gave $4 million. The goal is to have $20 million in this organization to pay the lawyers to defend you. You're going to pay a few $1,000s a year. That's not enough, obviously, if you get sued a few times, as we said. So the program has its own money, not just the money it collects from members, to pay lawyers to defend you. So I'll stop here. Questions later after Carlos. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. This sounds like a good value for money for legal insurance for some of us who are constantly threatened. But I might have to wait in Nepal for phase 3 to be included in it. How long will that be? Thank you. Carlos, next.
Oh, it's working. So I'll come here. I'll try not to knock everything down midway. And thank you very much for the organizers, to the organizers for the invitation. Difficult to present now after such great presenters, but I'll give my best. So I'm from Media Defense. As Kunda mentioned, we used to be called Media Legal Defense Initiative, so you might know us as MLDI. In 2020, we changed our name, simplified to Media Defense, but we're still the same organization. We're based in London, and we provide legal support to journalists who are sued for their work. We work all over the world, and we try and be available where the need is highest. So we have very few cases in North America and Western Europe, and mostly we support cases in Latin America, in the Caribbean as well, in Africa, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and Asia as well. We have 20 funded partners, national legal defense centers all over the world that we fund to provide that help a bit more easily than having to apply for help from media defense. We have partners in Latin America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and that number is growing. We're signing up 2 more new partners later this year. So what we do is we work in 2 fronts. We provide emergency defense for journalists who are sued. So if you are sued for your work, you can apply for our support, and we provide a small grant or a larger grant, depending on the case, to the lawyer who's representing you in that case. If you don't know a lawyer, you don't trust a lawyer, we can help you, we can facilitate, contact you link you up with a lawyer who we trust and who we've worked before. And we also engage in strategic litigation. So we're trying to fight back, and we seek accountability for journalists who have been victims of human rights violations or who have been sometimes convicted in SLAPP cases. So we're trying to redress those issues by pursuing cases before regional courts or before the UN treaty bodies as well. So we do both types of cases. We have an in-house legal team of excellent lawyers who oversee this work and represent clients before international courts. I've got probably a few of our clients here at GIJC. Some of them are here, and we're thankful for your support. Last year in 2022, Media Defense supported 188 cases all over the world. Out of those 188 cases, 40% of them we considered to be SLAPPs. So you see that it's a really high number of cases, and that number is growing. So I think what Bea and Alex mentioned, it's very true, and we see that evidence in our numbers as well. We supported cases in 23 countries, so in every region of the world. And I'll mention some of these cases that we've faced and we've supported, and some of them that we are engaging in, and also some of the actions we're taking to try and redress this situation, which is getting more and more difficult. The first case, which I think it's the most extraordinary case I've seen in 20 years of being a human rights lawyer, is a case from my country, from Brazil, of a journalist who published a satirical tweet in 2020 and about an evangelical church in Brazil and the then president, or family of the then president of Brazil. And he was sued. He was the target of 141 lawsuits. In every state of Brazil, there are 27, except the state where he lives, in São Paulo, which is also fantastic. So that was obviously a coordinated attack by this evangelical church to do exactly what Bea already described, to silence him, to harass him, to create an embarrassment, and to basically try and bankrupt him. We got in touch with him, we offered support, and we worked with a Brazilian lawyer, and he's already won more than 110. I think the latest number is almost 120 of those cases have been archived. He hasn't lost a single one, which is, I think, thanks to the excellent legal representation he received in Brazil. That's an example of the type of coordinated attack against journalists that we see all over the world. Kunda was talking to me earlier that a journalist in Bangladesh was a victim of 78, was it right? 79 lawsuits as well. So it's not something that's exclusive to Brazil, it's happening elsewhere. A slightly lesser number of lawsuits were filed against a blogger, a blogger who was denouncing corruption in the local administration in the northeast of Brazil. She was the target, or is the target, of 13 lawsuits, both civil and criminal. She's in the interior of the country with very little resources to defend herself. So luckily, she contacted an organization in Brazil who reached out to us, and we're now helping her. But the lawsuits that these journalists face are not only defamation or libel, they include a plethora of different threats. From tax audits, for instance, you might have heard Carlos Dada this morning talking about the Pegasus attacks against El Faro in El Salvador. Well, El Faro has been also the target of other types of attacks. They've actually defending themselves against 4 tax audits, which could bankrupt the media outlet. Other criminal cases that have been filed against them, and we're supporting them. We're very proud to be supporting El Faro in these lawsuits. In Ghana, another very interesting case, I think it touches on the cross-border lawsuits and what Alex mentioned about Harare and London. The Fourth Estate is an independent media outlet who was sued by a church. Again, I mean, I was thinking about my presentation. There are quite a few religious examples here. So a church, they reported on mismanagement of funds and corruption by a church. And these churches have branches in several countries, right? The one that sued, the pastors from the church that sued JP Cuenca in Brazil also have branches all over the world. So this church sued them in Ghana, but only for libel. But they weren't that wasn't enough. So they also filed a lawsuit against them in the UK. So they have to defend themselves in the UK. And we're working with their lawyers. We provided financial support for the lawyer defending them in Ghana and also in the UK. And we're engaging in the strategy and trying to help them defend these cases. It could bankrupt the organization. As Alex mentioned, the cost regime in the UK is absolutely crazy, and that's not something minor that we need to talk about, that we can just gloss over. It's extremely expensive. You can talk about hundreds of thousands of pounds in only one lawsuit. I have two more examples from Latvia, from a local politician, mayor who sued a journalist as well, and from Mexico, a prominent journalist who was sued by a governor, and an extended lawsuit that took years to go through, and is now in an appeal. So we have examples from all over the world where we're engaging with lawyers and with journalists on the ground. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what we are doing to not only to defend journalists, which is extremely important, but also to try and change the scene and the level of threats. So we are, at Media Defense, we are actively filing amicus briefs or third-party interventions before apex courts, constitutional courts, Supreme Courts all over the world, and also before the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and the three African regional courts, to try and raise awareness of these courts about the phenomenon of SLAPPs, and asking these courts to refer to these issues and to establish precedents and guidelines for governments to abide by. We've done that successfully in two cases at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, two recent precedents from Ecuador and from Costa Rica that for the first time mentioned the issue of SLAPPs and basically instruct governments to address this phenomenon because it's detrimental to the environment for journalism, which states should protect. In Europe, there's the precedent of 000 against Russia as well, which came out in 2021, or I think 2021, which was also very positive. And we engaged in Colombia in a very interesting lawsuit, constitutional challenge, with a local partner, with El 20 from Colombia, where the Constitutional Court issued an amazing ruling, amazing decision, instructing the government to change the law and address the phenomenon of SLAPPs in Colombia. And we believe that that precedent will be very influential in other regional courts in Latin America, but also elsewhere in the world. We're engaging at the European Court of Human Rights and at the UK Supreme Court with amicus briefs in order to address the issue that Alex mentioned of the cost regime in the UK for these lawsuits. It's impossible for a journalist, especially an independent journalist, to defend him or herself when they're faced with tens of thousands of costs, even if they win the case. That's exactly the case we're supporting, a case of a Polish language publication in London. They won the case, but they still have to pay part of the costs of the petitioner. So, which is quite unbelievable, but that's how it works in some instances in the UK. And they obviously don't have the money to do that, and they could go bankrupt. And finally, in Brazil, because of that case of JP Cuenca, we instigated together with the Brazilian Press Association and others. I know Abragi is here, our partner from Brazil. The Public Prosecutor's Office initiated an investigation against that evangelical church because of these coordinated lawsuits against that journalist. And the National Council of Justice eventually passed a recommendation on how judges should deal with these lawsuits filed in several states. And the National Council of Justice will monitor these types of lawsuits. So at least these big coordinated attacks with several lawsuits will we'll see some sort of measure of redress. Finally, the other way that we're trying to help journalists is through networking. So last year, together with CPJ and the Thomson Reuters Foundation and another number of organizations, there are 15 or 16 members, and I won't mention all of them. The Van Center is also part of this coalition. We set up the Legal Network for Journalists at Risk, which is basically a one-stop shop for journalists to ask for support if they're sued because of their work. And this group of organizations will then join together to provide broad support for these cases. Not only financial support, not only legal support, it could be trial observation, which sometimes is very important. It could be participating in the case with an amicus brief. It could be coordinating advocacy at some level. So there are several ways in which this group of organizations is prepared to engage and support journalists. And the final point that I wanted to mention, and I'm probably running out of time, and please tell me to shut up if that's the case, is to mention the consequences of these cases to individual journalists, which I think is overlooked sometimes. We talk about the cases, we talk about the number of lawsuits, we talk about the costs, but individually for the person who's the target of the lawsuit, it's extremely detrimental. There could be a tendency for self-censorship. There's the fear of bankruptcy. One case they were supporting, for instance, the journalist saved up all his life and he was buying an apartment, and because of a lawsuit, the bank denied the mortgage, and he was almost concluding the purchase of the apartment, and the bank said, hey, you've got that lawsuit, you could be liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars. We can't give you that mortgage. You won't be a good client. He eventually lost that case, and we took that case to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We're sure that he win the case eventually down the line. And the final element, which is extremely important for journalists, especially for individual journalists and freelancers, which make up the bulk of the people we support. So 75% of the journalists we support at Media Defense are individual journalists, and that's bloggers, that's freelance journalists, that's citizen journalists, photographers. 15% are independent media outlets, and 10% is basically the constitutional challenges and the international cases that we take on. The consequence to the reputation of journalists, which is another element that these slappers, as Bea mentioned, wants to target. They want to ruin the reputation of journalists. They want to damage your credibility, and that's extremely detrimental. So not only we need to defend these lawsuits, but we also need to think creatively on how to, I won't say that we need to attack, I think that would be too crude, but we need to take action to address these cases or this situation in a more structural or systemic way. And we're trying to do that bit by bit, and I'm really glad to be here with Bea and Alex in this effort. Thank you very much, Kunda.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, I neglected something very important. Peter Norlander and Jody Blankenship of Reporter Shield are sitting in the back. They're checking up on me, but they're also out at a booth with a big banner where everybody has coffee, and you can go get personalized information and advice about Reporter Shield. You don't have to pay for that, and they're very nice. So check out Reporter Shield at that booth whenever you can over the next few days. Thank you.
Okay, after that commercial break, we have, it seems after listening to all three of you that it's not just the financial burden that comes from a lawsuit. It's, the legal fees, the court reparations. It's also the time. And I know journalists in our region, in a neighboring country, where the editor spends all his time attending to these court cases where he has to appear in person. He can't even send a lawyer there. And this is so detrimental to press freedom, to self-censorship, and everything else that you mentioned. On top of all this, you have the media, where the business model has collapsed. where the media itself is struggling for survival, both economic as well as political and other pressures. So it can really be, a lawsuit like this can really be the final nail in the coffin for many publications, and it's a real threat, and I'm really glad that we have organizations like Reporters Shield and Media Defense to help out. Before I throw open the floor to questions, if you have any comments on each other's.
Yeah, just one comment on what you have said, that we should also talk about the emotional part of these procedures. My experience is that journalists tend to say it's changing now, that they keep saying that this is part of my job. That's my experience from the last 15 years. This is changing. I can see some shift, but I can see, myself, how hard it is to be there, to be a defendant, a criminal defendant in these cases. So this is an important element to talk about, and I don't think that we talk enough about this part.